Well, hey, welcome everybody who is joining. We got a lot of folks that are still coming into the meeting. We're going to get started, and I'll just kind of start off by sharing at a high level. For many of you who are here today with us, you know about this workshop series. We do them pretty much every month, and the theme of it is how to get more out of ServiceNow. Now, sometimes the topics have a lot to do with ServiceNow, and sometimes it has just a little bit to do with ServiceNow, and it might be focused on more things around the process and people side of the equation, and of course, then looking at how getting those pieces of the puzzle in order can really help you fully leverage the ServiceNow platform and the licensing that you guys own. So today is one of those sessions, a session that's going to really focus on building a transformational strategy. And from an agenda perspective, I'll share more on the details in a moment. But first, let me talk a little bit about who's going to be speaking today. So we've got Chris Cortez. Chris heads up our innovation and strategy team here inside the ServiceNow practice at CDW. I think most of you know this, but CDW is one of the top ServiceNow partners in the ecosystem. And inside of that team here at CDW, we've got an innovation team. That team does focus more on the people process side of the equation and works in concert, right, with our ServiceNow practice to help deliver solutions that not only change the way you use technology, i.e. the ServiceNow platform, but also how work moves through your organization, organizational change management, and strategy at an even higher level. Chris heads up that team. Lauren Campbell, part of that team too. He's a senior innovation guide. And, for those of you that might have been at Knowledge 23, Lauren, Chris, and I were down there, and ServiceNow was kind enough to let us speak on this topic. And we did a lighter version of what you're going to see today at Knowledge 23. And Chris and Lauren were able to take that session and really build it out to a true educational workshop, which you guys are going to be part of right now. So let's talk about the session itself. I've already shared a little bit, right? And kind of a spoiler alert early on. This is a little less about ServiceNow today, and a little bit more about the people process and the entire strategy. But what you will hear these guys talk about, and we'll ultimately tie it back to, once you've got a roadmap, a plan, a transformational strategy, once you've got that firing on all cylinders, obviously the keys to execute, move that into practice, right? That's going to rely on a lot of things, including the technology that you've got at your disposal. So if you're a ServiceNow user, which most folks attending today, are, but some of you are considering ServiceNow, I think you'll find the content fits in either case. But without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to Chris. A little housekeeping as I do that. If you've got questions, the panel on the right side has a separate section for questions. So if you find that and type your question in there, we might answer them as we go, or we might batch them to the end. And if we don't get to your question for any reason, we'll make sure we follow up separately with you. So feel free to ask questions along the way, but we'll have some time at the end for me to read those questions back to these guys and let them chime in on that. Mr. Cortez, you are up.
All right. Thank you, John. And hey, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So before we jump into how we actually help create that transformation strategy, let's take a few minutes and just frame up really the conversation. So let's start with, what is the definition of a transformational strategy? And really, it's about creating a vision for the organization, communicating that vision, and empowering employees to take ownership of their work, right? The ultimate goal here is to really create a high-performing, adaptable, and resilient organization that can really thrive in a rapidly changing business environment. And as we know, I think we've had a few moments in the past few years where we really have had to transform the way that we do work. So I won't bore you with a COVID transformational story. I know a lot of us are having to go through transformation with the current economic conditions, but prior to me coming over to CDW, I was in the health insurance space. And if you remember back when the Affordable Health Care Act first came into play, we actually had to transform the way that we were doing business. And one of the visions that we had was really to get to the exchanges before anybody else did. So we really, as leadership, had to come up with what that vision looked like and had to really steer and guide and really empower our employees how to get there. So transformation is always happening, and we're going to take just a few moments and kind of go through and talk about who really needs a transformational strategy.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, folks, for joining this session. So when we talk about transformation, we're obviously trying to understand where people are and where they need to be and how they get there. And those people are usually broken in various groups. And they all have different needs. They all have different language of service management. And what we find is the organizations that we help is those different layers are using different language that's not resonating with each other. So part of our assessments and how our approach is to make sure that we're going through these various layers and understanding what's needed and how it connects to that central span of service management all the way through. So I'll take this over to a next piece right here. These are a lot of the issues that we typically see, and I'm sure a lot of these look familiar. The whole idea is when service management is misaligned with inside an organization. Typically, if there's no shared understanding, you're going to be able to get some of these pain points right here. And starting at the strategic planning, it's all going to be about identifying value, seeing visibility, managing that risk, been able to get that data clearly to be able to make decisions at that level that's going to be able to drive that organization forward. But all through the organization, we start to see pain points that happen as a result of misaligned service management. I mean, Chris, we've seen some of these pieces right here. Tell me a little bit of the ones you see. For example, if we could talk just even about things like the smaller projects, even the projects like asset and stuff. How you see those types of things, how they can be misaligned and mishandled inside an organization.
Well, I think it goes down to really understanding the value that those projects are really going to bring, right? And that's what we need to first establish is really helping executives, helping organizations really establish, which projects are going to bring the highest value, and then also not trying to boil the ocean. So chunking those up into smaller projects that really have a defined end state of where a company wants to get to. So what we're really recommending is really sitting down first, understanding what the outputs and the outcomes are going to be of some of those initiatives. They're going to add the most value to the organization, and then start chunking those out into smaller digestible projects.
And I think that's key. And a lot of the organizations that come towards us, they'll be asking about a specific project, something that actually is inside. And that project or that area is going to be linked to so many other pieces of the organization. And we could go in and help them and tactically help at that one piece. But we always find that if we're using a maturity assessment or assessment along these lines, we can find out where the other dependencies are. And that's when we're making sure that the results that we have for that special project are actually going to be, we'll look upstream to make sure that those components are looked at and addressed. And it's not just the technology also, obviously it's the process and the behavior. So just a little bit about us right now. As Chris had mentioned, he comes from a client side, as do I, as do all our innovation team. We've all sat in the client chair, and we feel the significance of that is understanding that service management projects have to exist with other projects that's going. I mean, yes, our team sees everything as service management or as a variation of it, but when we engage with our approach, that we're always aware of what's going on around the client, and we can't perform our discovery and our delivery and our recommendations towards execution in a bubble. It has to be done in conjunction with not just the other technology, but the business that's going on inside that organization. And again, we've done so many of these assessments in the past. And when we talk about this, I think the key value to somebody like yourselves listening to this is that we see the patterns, not just the technology patterns. We start to see the behavior patterns. We start to see the processes, and we're able to take that understanding and then move that on to our next clients. So let's just talk a little bit about our service management view. So if we build out this slide, we see that there's always about a demand, and there's going to be some form of outcome against that demand. And the demand is usually three questions. Somebody wants something fixed, or they want new value. inside there. So that'd be on the left side. And on the right side, we've got an output. And that's going to be a product, a laptop, a phone, a tablet, a server, or service or application. And how we get there as we build through this piece, we're either trying to run the operation or we're trying to build the operation for the order and fix to run. And then, of course, the build through the new. And you can see the processes are in between there. And this, again, this is the way how we look at things. This is how we understand how to unravel our clients' Christmas lights, if you will. But this is just a process and behavior view, this particular piece. But then we start to look at the overlay, the technologies that are actually going to be doing that. And what is that input? And how is it actually facilitating that work and the behavior and the process that's doing that? But it doesn't end just there, because there's actually people that are making those requests and getting the benefit of those requests, whether it be the reporting something broken or they'd like something or they'd like something new. And then we've also got the service delivery teams that are actually using the tools that are actually providing that service. So that technology has to be working for all those parties. And ultimately, it's going to be benefiting the outside client. And that's either a customer, it's either a citizen, it's patients, or students. So again, we have to look through all those various layers, and that's how our approach works, to make sure that we're not just looking at this as a technology piece, we're looking at this as a process and behavior piece. And then, of course, the whole goals we're trying to do is we're trying to move from good, so a response type culture, all the way to a preemptive type culture, where we're starting to predict the demand, we're starting to answer that question before it's asked, and we're starting to improve that experience of the people they're asking, and ultimately the experience right across the chain itself.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. So hopefully that added a little bit of context. Now let's jump in and talk about exactly how we actually will use our maturity assessment roadmaps to co-create a transformational strategy with you and your organization. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to understand the current state of maturity around that run and build sides of the organization. So we're looking at all of those processes, the way that you're doing governance. And again, I can't stress this enough. It is not just about looking at the technology side. I've been down that road. It's very hard to create a transformational strategy just focusing on the technology. This is really a holistic approach, and that's going to, again, include not only technology, the platform or platforms in the organization, but the people and the process. And it's really kind of taking a page out of ITIL 4 here. It's really about starting with where you're at. So we really want to understand exactly what's going on in the run and build side of your organization. Once we understand where you're at, now we need to also understand where do we need to go and how do we get there. And it's about defining what transformation looks like for your organization. What is that ultimate vision that you have in terms of maturity? Another big part of this is really identification of risk, and more importantly, how to mitigate those risks, right? We want to understand where the potential pitfalls are going to be as you move through your transformational journey, and we want to get ahead of those before they potentially derail what we're trying to do around transformation. And typically our assessments will take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, depending on organizational complexity, right? The size of your organization, how big your service management departments are, et cetera. So, that's just a little bit of an overview of our maturity assessments and roadmaps.
Thank you, Chris. And just before we move further, the point of risk, I think, is fascinating, because I would find that it's probably about 50-50 with our clients that don't either see the risks or put the appropriate value on the risks that's coming at them. So this is pre a workshop. Through the workshops and through these assessments, we're able to actually have them see what's coming at, where the risks are going to happen, where the impacts are going to happen, and how we can make quick wins to mitigate, move away from that.
All right. So with that transformational strategy and maturity assessment roadmap, there's really 3 key deliverables that come out of this. And the first one is really about creating alignment, right? And we want to really get above any particular work stream. And we first want to understand what that North Star is, right? We want to have everybody moving towards that common vision and really kind of, swimming in the same direction in terms of where we want to get to. And by setting clear goals, developing a roadmap for change, and engaging employees in the transformation process, you're going to be able to create a culture of innovation, collaboration, and continuous improvement that will really enable you to thrive in the future. I think a big threat to transformation is a lack of alignment between the transformational goals and your larger business strategy, right? If the goals are not aligned with the overall business strategy, the transformation may not deliver the desired outcome. So again, this is about not only creating alignment with that service management organization, but creating alignment with that transformational goals to the overall business strategy. The second deliverable here is really about keeping you out of design jail, right? And design is really going to manifest itself in two ways. And that's going to be the design of the processes. We want to make sure that they're fit for purpose and fit for use. And then, of course, how the technology is configured to facilitate those processes. So design is a very important aspect of transformation. It's going to help ensure that the transformation initiative is effective, efficient, and sustainable. And it'll help ensure alignment with business goals, facilitate stakeholder engagement, and really enable that innovation, and also hopefully will increase the sustainability of this plan. The third key deliverable here is really the chosen path, the roadmap, knowing what to do and in what order and in what dependencies do we have along the way. So the roadmap is really going to be an essential tool for all of our transformation initiatives, as it's really going to provide a clear and structured plan for achieving those desired outcomes, right? It really also will help us manage resources effectively, help facilitate the communication between stakeholders. We can then actually track the progress that we're making. We can actually say, hey, we checked the box there. You can see the progress that we're making towards our overall strategy, and also will increase accountability, right? We know that there's going to be certain groups that are tied to certain recommendations and certain actions and activities along the way, and that will ultimately increase accountability. All right, so engagement. Obviously, as we get into this, engagement is really key to creating that alignment and that transformational strategy. And this is really engaging all of the stakeholders across your service management organization and really involving them in this design process. And it's really ensuring that their needs and expectations are taken into account, and they start to get invested in the transformation initiative. Now, one thing I want to call out here is this is not only engagement from, say your IT department, right? That service management organization, leadership, service desk. But this is also taking into account the folks that are actually consumers of those services that you're providing. So we really want to talk to leadership outside of IT. We want to talk to the users that are consuming your services on a day-to-day basis, and really get their perspective on where you are current state and where they really need or expect you to be in the future.
Chris, just before we go on to that one, a lot of the pushback we'll get when we're at this stage, we're introducing this, and we'll ask to speak to some of their internal clients. We'll get a lot of pushback, and they'll say, well, no, we already know we're not delivering what we should be. We shouldn't really be talking to those people. We already know. And what we find is, first of all, we insist, and first of all, by talking to that internal client, they sometimes, their expectations might not be as high as where they're expected. They'll want certain things done. And by getting an understanding of that, we can serve them how they want to be served right off the bat. We don't have to provide them a full system right off from get-go. We'll be able to meet their needs immediately and find that out. And just engaging that and finding that gives us so many insights to be able to start to increase that service management experience for everybody. So thanks, Chris.
Absolutely.
And so the area of focus. So we have this this slide and this conversation with the client when we're initially trying to understand as to what we're going to be investigating. So we'll start from the very start. The foundational piece regardless of which areas we go into, we definitely need to be speaking to the leaders with inside IT. We need to be speaking to some of the leaders with inside the internal business. And from the internal business, we need to be speaking to the internal clients, again, the people that we talk to that benefit from this service, whichever the service is. Might be IT, it could be HR, it could be whatever service that's going on. We want to be able to see how they're being received. And then we also want to understand a little bit more of the strategy of the service management direction. When we're starting to get all those voices together, we'll be able to get our North Star, if you will. We'll start to know what good looks like. And by the way, this is always validated back against the client. And then as we go around, we'll see with core processes, that's going to be the usual suspects at the point of demand and supply. So that's going to be your incident, your request, your problem, your knowledge, all the various pieces right there that's going to be right at that front line. And then as we go through this, we've got IT business management. This is going to be new value creation. That's the I want something new. I either want an improvement or I want something that's innovative right there. How is that process going on? How is the demand going? How is that taken? How is that valued against the actual strategy of the organization and what they're trying to do? And if we're going through the rest of the piece where you're talking about asset and CMDB, that's a very, very common one. That's going to be where a lot of the financial pain is felt right off the bat. And people need to understand this. We go down and we start to understand the asset life cycle, and of course the configuration, how it's configured, what's the leading, what's the technology, so what's the process, who's the owners as to how that's been populated. And we're going through integrated risk management, all the various aspects of risk, including of course SecOps with inside this customer service management. When we're having the idea of and I'm not just talking about CSM or customers or CXM, customer experience management, not just outside the organization, but how is that internal customer been looked after? And then finally, of course, enterprise service management. And one of the key ones that we see all the time, and I'm sure it rings true from you folks on the call, it's HR is going to be one of those pieces that's usually involved in our investigations, just because that they can either be a huge contributor to the volume of work of service if we're not onboarding people properly from the start, or we're not moving them with inside the organization, or not exiting them effectively, it causes just this big spiral of work behind it. So again, these are the areas that we present to our clients, and it starts the conversation. It doesn't necessarily end here. We can start to move, and as we're actually inside the assessment, we can start to move to where we see the hotter spots. But this starts it. It starts to get everybody on that page to start to understand where we're starting to investigate.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the methodology and approach we go through as we are looking at these areas of focus and helping create this transformation strategy. So we really go through 4 phases here. And the first phase is really the discover phase. This is where we do very little talking and we do a lot of listening. We're asking questions. We're taking notes upon notes upon notes. We usually come out there with hundreds of pages of notes that Lauren has to sift through. But what we're really trying to do is, number one, document that vision and business goals, right? As we go through the areas of focus, document where we are current state. So as we move into the assess phase, we really start to organize this information and start to identify, where do we maybe have some gaps with, best practices? Where are some areas that we really need to focus on and start to prioritize areas of focus based on the value that we're going to get in terms of improving those specific areas. So then as we move into our analyze phase, this is really where a lot of the magic happens. This is where we really spend a lot of time going back through our notes and really coming up with ideas. And those ideas are pertinent to your journey of maturity, right? And so we start to funnel those ideas back through what we heard in that discover phase, really funnel them back through the lens of the business, make sure that our ideas are aligned with your overall business goals and strategies. And what they really form is they really form the building blocks as we move into the recommend phase, and we start to really say, okay, where of those ideas, what are the highest priority items that we should be focusing on? And we start to then assemble our roadmap from there. And we don't just throw it in a single line roadmap. We usually will be coming up with themes, right? And we're going to be focusing on, okay, here's what we need to do in the platform. Here's what we need to do maybe from a process perspective. And also here's what we need to do from an organizational change perspective, so we can get you from from your current state to that desired future state.
So the practicalities of our methodology, how it's carried out, was we go through an align phase, and this is how that menu that we showed previous, that's what starts the conversation. It starts to get that high level conversation going. And as soon as we start to narrow that down, then we start to we engage with a workbook, for example, and that's a catalog of meetings that we need to have depending on where the areas of focus are going to be. And we work with the customers to actually see who the right people are. And in a lot of cases, we'll ask for process owners, and a lot of our customers don't have formalized process owners actually named. So we work with them. We will, through that process of alignment, we're trying to say, well, who would do this for that? We story tell it, and we get those right people, because it's important as soon as we get into that discovery phase that Chris was mentioning, that we've got the right people on the call. So we validate this 2 or 3 times before it's gone, and we work with the client to make sure the calendaring is working. And as Chris mentioned, we have 2 consultants on this all the time to make sure that we're checking not only what the client's saying, but what we're also hearing back and forth. So we go through that discovery. It's very important that we're just listening. We're not solutioning. We're not trying to understand how they would like it to be. We would like to hear how it is, because we're trying to get to the root of why it is what it is. At that stage, we come back with observations. And those observations, we check with the client just to make sure that we're hearing them correctly. Because we're going to be in there for a short period of time. We're all in for those few weeks, but we want to make sure that we're hearing things correctly. As soon as that's validated with the client, we move through to the roadmap phase. And again, as Chris suggested, we start off with this roadmap. We test that against the practicalities of the client environment. If there's going to be another adjacent project that's going to either take up budget or resources, we need to know about that before we actually come up with this recommendation, because it's very important that it's executable. It's practically executable. It's not something you have to adjust to make work afterwards. It's ready to go when it's done. And then finally, we move to the final presentation. We move to a wider audience, and we're doing this to at this stage, it's not only just us, but it's also our client. We're acting as a joint team, and now we're presenting outward. So that team, the client team, they are now co-authors on this piece, and through these iterative meetings that we're doing, we're now completely aligned. We present wider. You typically wait about a week or so, and then we start to extract the projects from that. And those projects can be something the clients does themselves. It could be something that we help. It could even be another partner that can do that. It's agnostic all the way through.
Yeah. And Lauren, just to touch on one more piece here, just to make it very, very clear, the roadmap portion where we really come up with that initial roadmap, our innovation team does a great job, and we say, hey, listen, this is what we think your roadmap needs to be. But we don't just throw it over the wall and say, hey, do you agree? And we're going to go present to the wider audience. What we really want to do is we really want to be challenged. And this is where we really start co-creating that roadmap to make sure that it's feasible, right? And number one, make sure that this is something that you can actually execute. The last thing that we want to come in and do is come in and create a vision and a transformational strategy that is really unattainable. So that this roadmap piece is very, very key. We have, at least one meeting where we'll present it back. We'll answer questions. We'll get feedback. We'll be challenged. We'll challenge you. And then we'll really go back iteratively for really, as long as it takes to make sure that we're coming up with a roadmap that is really going to be something that you're actually going to be able to execute and that you feel comfortable owning once the engagement is over.
Thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about the deliverables themselves. So a big part of it is perception. Is what your people thinking? We're social creatures, and we like to stay on everyone's good side. And sometimes talking the truth is hard to do inside organizations. So we have mechanisms in which we can get the perceptions that doesn't point at people, but points at systems. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve our system all the way through. So we've got that perceptions report. We've also got the summary of the observations. Again, this is the pieces that we understand, and it's tested against that. And by the way, when we do that, we're usually testing to see what's good and what's not working well, or where the challenges are. Now, what's good, the reason that's important is we know our clients don't have time, and it's not practical to take everything down to ground and build up again. We have to build up from what's good and what's working there. That's going to be the quickest way. Again, what Chris mentioned before, start where you are all the way through.
And then the second part of these deliverables, as you can see, is really that roadmap, right? And again, if you notice, we don't just give you a long-term roadmap, but we really break this out into phases. It's really about what you do and in what order. And I know you can't see too clearly, but these roadmaps are really broken up again into themes. And the three main themes are really going to be around people, process, and our and platform. But oftentimes we find that, hey, there is an area, maybe it be governance, maybe it be user experience, maybe it be the CMDB, where we know that is a huge focus and in an area that we really need to spotlight within the roadmap. So oftentimes we will give that its own section. So again, this is really chunking our recommendations down into phases so that we can then move into a recommended project summary and timeline, really working with you to identify, which of the recommendations in phase one we can maybe break out and should handle as a project, maybe which recommendations, you might take on your own and do something outside of a project. Not all the recommendations are going to need to be executed through a project. Our hope is that there are plenty of quick wins in phase one that we're going to be able just to allow you to move as soon as really you see the roadmap and start acting on those recommendations. One more thing to call out about the roadmap here. So you see kind of our recommendations there represented as blocks, but behind these blocks there is actually a library card. And that library card is really going to give you a more detailed description about what we mean with that recommendation, what exactly needs to happen, what are the expected outcomes as you start to implement these recommendations. And then more importantly, we call out any dependencies. So a lot of the times, as you're going through this transformational journey, there might be a recommendation that needs to be moved up based on the changing business environment, right? And so we will be able to kind of look forward and say, hey, if we really need to focus on a recommendation that is called out in phase 4, we'll make sure that you understand all of the pieces and dependencies that need to be in place before we can really tackle that recommendation. So that's what these library cards are really included for every recommendation that we have. We won't go over those in detail as we're presenting them, but we give those to you with the final deliverable. All right. So really that is, really our secret sauce to helping you come up with a transformational strategy. And really, what are the next steps following our engagement? And number one is, again, you having that ownership of what that plan is going to be, that roadmap, right? Understand how we're going to execute this. Also understanding really what actions need to be taken immediately. Following the engagement and what needs to happen maybe 3 or 4 months down the line. And that's really where number 3 comes into play, is really helping you kind of build out a project plan or multiple project plans so that we can start to reap the benefits of the results. However, there is one more item that we want to talk about today, and that is really to kind of help mitigate risk. And Lauren, if you go to the next slide for me real quick,
Absolutely. Actually, Mr. Manna, did you want to step in for a quick second?
Yeah, that'd be great. This is exciting stuff, and I know the things we just talked about there, maturity assessment and roadmap. I wanted to make sure that all of our CDW customers on the session today knows that we'll get a copy of this deck to you. If you're already doing some of this stuff internally on your own and you just want some advice, if you want to get some time with Lauren or Chris or a member of our team to kind of talk through what you're doing on your own internally and ask for some guidance, we're here to coach you. Later at the end of the session, I'll talk about some other ways we can partner with you. But the idea here is to enable you to start thinking in this direction if you haven't started, or if you already have. Hopefully some of the things we're sharing here will help you kind of accelerate. So just wanted to share that as you guys kind of segue to the next thing. But I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end of the session as well.
Thanks, John, and Chris. Thanks for setting up this slide. So the biggest threat is lack of buy-in. So our technology, our process, technology always works. I mean, for the most part, it's pretty well bulletproof. Our processes have been developed over sets of decades, they've been tested all the way through, but the buy-in is the trickiest part. And people, when we talk about buy-in, people say, yeah, no, they're bought in, but there's a whole bunch of reasons they may not actually be bought in. They might think they're being bought in. They might not have the right expectations or the same expectations as the people through the stack that we were talking about before. They might not have the same skill sets or the skill sets required all the way through. So buy-in is absolutely massive. And quite frankly, it's one of the risks that most organizations typically underestimate. And that is the piece. Go to any of the business schools and you look at the results for project or program failure, it's going to be buy-in in some form of language, be it at the executive level or going to be at the level of execution. So just on this, there's key points to what we've got. We've got a program. It's an immersive experience that we use to actually get teams together. We put everyone from executive officers, be it the CEO, CFO, typically the CIO, doesn't have to necessarily be together, all the way to system administrators. They can all sit in this group. And what we do is we turn them around in which that they're not taking their actual positions inside reality. We give them different roles that makes it safer for them, and also they get to see a different perspective. And in that thing, they're able to see their experience and their confidence builds up. They start to understand by going to a simulated environment. They start to see where some of the issues that they will have, and they're always presented in that. Their knowledge level starts to come up. Once you go through a path as an individual, but also collectively as a group, your knowledge of what's coming at you is so much stronger. And then the skill set, and this is cross skills. This isn't just skill inside the technology or the platform. This is understanding how important the right communication against that technology has to be placed at the right side, putting signage to making sure that you're increasing the experience of the people either delivering or receiving that service management. And then alignment. Again, well, that's one of the questions that we hear, or that's one of the statements we hear, is our clients will say, no, we're aligned. But what does that really mean? Does it mean that they want to move forward and implement a new piece of the ServiceNow platform? Yeah, that might be so. But does that also mean that they understand how to handle things when things go sideways? And they typically do. And what's all the various configuration items that lead to that piece? Usually they're not as aligned as they think they are. So we'll talk just a little bit about the approach. We use a piece of a methodology called the Kolb experiential learning cycle, and it's basically the way you learn how to ride a bike. There's a constant. You do something. You actually try something at first, and there's very little theory done. So we put you inside a simulated operating environment that has projections on screens, that has data that's collecting not only the actual technology component, but the impact on the internal and external business. You get to see the finance, you get to see everything, and you go through it. And you might not do so well in the first session. And what happens, there's a period of reflection. It's you're starting to think about that. There's a process in which we have you reflecting and trying to understand what went wrong and what went right. And then from that, there's a bit of theory or the conceptualization here. We're starting to think about that. Well, what's some ideas to get us out of this? And then we explore. So we actually plan and program. And this is a cycle. We do this many times over and over. And it's actually what you do in your real life. We just do it over the period of a day. This stuff that we do here, that you take about 3 years to do. It's drawn out. You can't actually see it over that long period of time. But because we put it to this rapid reality, you get to see it real time. And then from the lessons, you start to understand, be able to move forward with that. So the deliverables of this piece, first of all, it's a uniting experience. If you've ever seen an organization where you've got a leader that's come in and said, I've just implemented ServiceNow from somewhere else before, that person typically brings 2 or 3 of the colleagues with them. And there's a reason for that, because they're aligned. They already speak the same language. This is also what this does. We help align people so they have the exact same expectations and they can start to move. And it's on a technology level, it's a process level, it's a behavior communication level all the way through. And then finally, what we also do is we provide a perception survey. So at the very end of this experience, we ask the people anonymously, don't ask them for their names, we'll say, tell us where the risks are. It's all free form answering. Tell us where the greatest opportunities lie. Where should we be focusing? And what we're really doing is we're getting a report here that's giving us quick wins. We can act immediately on these quick wins. But also what it's doing is it's giving us an understanding of where our permission levels are in moving forward. So important. If you're about to go over that mountain pass, you want to make sure everybody's aligned going up there. People stopping halfway or deciding to do something else could be catastrophic to the project and ultimately the program that's moving forward. So we can get a clear understanding of what people are thinking, and we can provide this back to the stakeholders that will allow the stakeholder to be able to manage the communication and manage their steps moving forward. So participation is key. Again, mentioned, we've got all sorts. We usually like to put internal customers inside there, and we give them the technology role, if you will. We give them the role that they're usually banging on the desk and wanting better service. We put them on that side of the desk, because it's not just to teach them how hard it is, but they also give us a perspective that we need to have in here. And again, that comes out in the reports. And again, having leadership involved in this is so key. It's fantastic. Usually when we run these events, one of the questions are, who from your organization should attend these? And they always point upwards. So getting everybody aligned is fantastic. Moving through the process preparation, as soon as a client shows interest towards this, we could do this next week. We've done it as short as a week. Usually takes about a month for the client's needs, because they have to schedule time and get the appropriate room ready and so forth. It is done on site. It is never, ever done online. And that's a reason. It's not a technology restriction. That's a human brain restriction. We need to have people in the room, and it's incredibly powerful all the way through. The delivery itself takes a day, and then we have a reflection. That's us presenting, generating and presenting the report that happens a few days, maybe a week later. Give you an idea, again, it's a room, it's a real experience. There's movement around. People are, when we ask how to rate this experience, it's usually about 92% and above. Everybody loves this. The day goes by incredibly fast. So a lot of times people say, well, what are you actually learning? What are you talking about, and so forth? So it's if you think about all the various processes, they're stacked in order of what needs to be done first. And that's the experience that happens. So it's done through a series of rounds. I'm demonstrating 3 rounds here, but it can actually be as much as 5 rounds. And again, it's that continuous do, theorize, or do, review, theorize, plan, and then do again. So you keep on doing that over and over. But you'll see some of the processes that have been identified here, but this is just the processes side. There's also the technology side. We start to understand configuration of the actual technology itself. Depending on the client's need, we can actually take their instance and demonstrate it and say, this is what's happening at this part of the room right here. And we can start to draw those connections from their internal experience, or the closed experience inside the simulation, to their real experience outside. And we can start to understand where some of the disconnects are happening. Again, that's what we're trying to find. We're trying to find the break here. So yeah. And then of course the reports, the perception reports we get. So again, stakeholders focus. So in this particular one, you'll see that the client has identified, or 24% of the clients attending felt that that technology was the issue. This particular report, when we talked with the client before, and we talked with the leadership and the executive and all the way to the practitioner, technology was seen as the issue going into this. After this, We're starting to see that they're saying that they want maturing process. And then, of course, it's a shared understanding that's going on. This gives us this understanding of where people are thinking. And if we go to the bottom right corner on service direction flow, that's a generic service map that we have that we represent for the client. So based on the experience, they'll say, okay, now where do you think some of the issues lie inside your service flow? And they're able to identify. So you'll see that knowledge and process and the technology tools are named along that whole piece. So that starts to tell our sponsor where they need to focus and where they need to focus the budget and the resources to move forward. So, John, I just put it back to yourself. I thank everyone for their attention through this. John, if you want to see if there's any questions that's coming.
Yeah, we do, Lauren. We have a couple of questions. I'm going to add, though, first, when I first met you, maybe it was 6 or 7 years ago, it was actually me coming to one of those live simulations. And I know that when I participated in that, after having helped implement ServiceNow for even years prior to that, it was amazing, from the customer's perspective, how the light bulbs went off. And you talked about that iceberg or the bottom part, getting the buy-in. I think a live simulation, which to me feels like an escape room for service management, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Tying it together with other things, of course, and especially if you've got a significant ServiceNow project coming on, this is where it can all accelerate ROI. So I had firsthand experience with that. Matter of fact, I know that when you joined our team officially, we were delivering some of these for ServiceNow, right? So ServiceNow was hiring us to deliver these, and they were inviting their customers. Again, the adoption of the platform, but also the organizational change management benefits are kind of built right in. So question-wise, going back to the, well, let's stay on the SIM since we just finished that part. When is the right time to do a SIM? Do you do it at the start or the end of a ServiceNow project?
Yeah, it's a great question. Ideally, if you're at the start, that would be the perfect time. And there's a reason for that, because once everybody starts on that journey and they have that expectation at the very start, as you start to get into the nuts and bolts of what you're doing with inside your piece, you'll have context to understand what you're moving forward. Now, that said, we'd like to catch everybody at the start, but sometimes people will be halfway through the project or even they'll be through implementation. They can still do it, because what it does is it starts to conceptualize everything they've been doing so far, and they'll be able to make some adjustments and change based on this. So it's never too late, preferred at the front, but any time, and any time is perfect for that, and not just on the technology side, but the process and the behavior side.
Yeah, I would agree. And not, as you say, at the front of a new ServiceNow rollout necessarily. That's great. But most of our customers already have ServiceNow and are halfway or a third, on this journey. I've seen us even tailor one of those workshops for being very CMDB and asset and knowledge focused, right? For
Absolutely.
one client who knows that that's what their next 18 months was going to look like organizationally from a change perspective. So agree there. On the assessment side, there was a question on how you're able to understand an organization's ServiceNow issues in just a few weeks. ServiceNow / process issues in just a few weeks, right? Because you talked about the assessment. I think it's typically runs, somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks. Sometimes, it can be a little bit longer, but ultimately it's in that sweet spot. How do we accomplish so much in such a short window?
Yeah, John, I think it goes back to the sessions that we have. We really try to break down and have, I think we've got in our arsenal over 30 different sessions that we have, and we don't like to see the same people in those sessions. So we want to understand and really get the power users of, say, incident management or of security operations into those rooms. And what we first want to understand is, what are their processes? Are they following best practices? Because a lot of times, if we're not following best practices, just from a process perspective, that's a red flag immediately. But also within those meetings, we're also understanding their use of the platform. How well does the platform facilitate those processes? And sometimes I'll be honest, it kind of turns into somewhat of a therapy session where we hear a lot of pain points and challenges directly from the users of a particular area of the platform. So that's how we're really able to kind of get to the bottom of those issues or identify those issues during those, that short window that is usually 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay, Chris, if I can just jump in also, the other thing too, aside from exactly as Chris said, because we've done so many of these assessments, there's patterns. There's definitely linked patterns. So we already know, as Chris has mentioned, as you're going down some of those rabbit holes, as soon as we start to go down there, we start to realize, then we must be able to see this on the other side. And that's usually what happens. So it's based on the experience and the work that we've done in the past. We can start to categorize and start to understand things very quickly. Again, it's not always completely assumed. We have to validate as we go through with our clients just to make sure, but it's definitely based on our breadth of experience.
Yeah, great point. I've got one more question, but I'm gonna add some commentary around all of this. Here at CDW, about 3/4 of our brand new ServiceNow customers that we get, so customers that they might buy laptops from CDW and do other things, but come to us for ServiceNow for the first time, 3/4 of them have had ServiceNow for more than 3 years. They've used other partners, they've done a lot of work themselves, and when they come to us, we kind of hear that same theme. It's not that the work they did was bad, the ServiceNow configuration work, and it's not that the partner they were using didn't know ServiceNow. It's almost always that the technical implementation and work that they asked to get done got done fine, but what was missing is the upfront work of process engineering or just process alignment, and then the organizational readiness and getting that adoption. So building the ServiceNow pieces and turning on parts of ServiceNow, rolling that out as part of a technical implementation generally is the easier part of what we do for a living. It's really digging in deep, talking about what the organization's North Star is, as Chris mentioned earlier, and then starting to align the work that's ahead of us to kind of all go in that direction, but then getting the buy-in. So one more question on assessment, then I want to share with everybody on the call a couple of ideas that we've got in next steps. Who from the organization is involved in the assessment, right? On the customer side, is it mostly tactical folks, ServiceNow administrators? Who are they?
So it's when we engage with an organization, we create a client group inside. So it's usually about 4 or 5 people, and those people are there are counterparts inside the client, and those people start to help us map out the people that are going to be attending. So one of the rules, the governance we're doing is we're trying to make sure, first of all, we can't take people away from bench for too long. We know that they've got day jobs. They probably got fires on those day jobs. So we have to make sure that we minimize that. So most meetings that we have are under 50 minutes. And we try to make sure, for example, for executives, they're going to be on no longer than one of those clients, the same sort of thing. So we're getting a representation of the leadership, the leadership clients, the leadership inside the client side, and also, of course, inside IT and around service management. We're trying to understand a lot of the practical people, the people that are actually doing the day job of service management. Because, for example, we're looking at incident, we're not looking at it just as a theory. We're looking at how it's practiced. We want to look at its impact all the way through. We're trying to get all those pieces. So we're getting a little mini ecosystem of service management inside that. Again, I want to make sure we're clear. We're not blocking everyone's calendar up for those 2 weeks. Usually, if it's a 2-week assessment, usually the heavy lifting on the client side, as far as time commitment, it's usually just in that first week, and it's usually about for no more than half a day all the way through. So again, we're trying to get that representation all the way up through that earlier stack as to who's going to be joining us, and depending on what the need is, will depend exactly on those roles.
Sounds good. So yeah, let's bring it home, Lauren. Let's talk about next steps. So clearly, this is part of the how to get more out of ServiceNow. Although you guys have seen, right, it was much more than that, and quite frankly, the output of either doing a self-assessment by yourselves or getting some help from us, or or a combination of the two, we can kind of see where that'll help kind of lead not only what do we do today, but the vision moving out, right, for up to 3 years in most cases, right? If there's interest, out there and you simply want to brainstorm with us. You're a CDW customer, or if you're not but are interested in being one, we will just do that kind of work with you. There's no cost to that, right? Let's get on the calendar. Feel free to email me directly, john.manna@cdw.com. I'll line up some time with Chris or Lauren or a member of the team, and we can brainstorm with you. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this area. We'll provide recommendations, and if you do want some help, we'll talk more about that as well. But the other thing, for those out there that kind of already know that if they're going to take next steps on building a transformational strategy, they're going to need help. If that's you, reach out to me as well. We're in a position to kind of strategically invest with our CDW customers, especially in areas like this. And by that, I mean, if you're interested in a maturity assessment and roadmap, let's talk about that. We'll kind of frame it up, and we'll contribute. For example, perhaps augment the typical maturity assessment and roadmap and add an additional day of workshop to maybe do one of those simulations that Lauren talked about, and we'll absorb the cost for that workshop, right? We're in partnership mode, especially for clients that are looking for accelerating the strategic side of the business. We're ready to roll up our sleeves. So reach out to me personally if you have any questions, just want to brainstorm, lunch and learn, or would like to know more about how we actually team up with customers to do a lot of what you saw today. So on that note, we'll make sure everybody gets a copy of the deck, a follow-up, a link with the recording. Email me directly if you have any questions or could use any help. Thanks, Chris and Lauren. Always exciting to get you guys involved. And it was great to see you expand our Knowledge 23 presentation that we did in Vegas and put a lot more teeth to it, for the clients here.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.